The deafening silence of the desert was pierced by a scream that echoed across the barren landscape as Katherine Ashton's fingers slipped from the rough edge of the abandoned well, plunging her into darkness. The year was 1879, and the unforgiving frontier of Taylorsville, Utah territory had just claimed another victim in its endless hunger for the unwary. Catherine Katie, to those who knew her, had arrived in Taylorsville only 3 days prior, stepping off the stagecoach with nothing but a small trunk of possessions and dreams as vast as the western sky. At 22, she had left behind the comforts of her Philadelphia home to answer an advertisement for a schoolteacher position in this dusty frontier town. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving their family with mounting debts and few prospects. The opportunity out west had seemed like salvation. Now, as she lay at the bottom of the forgotten well, her ankle twisted beneath her, and the afternoon sun a mere silver dollar of light far above, Catherine wondered if she had made the gravest mistake of her life. "Help!" she called out, her voice bouncing off the damp stone walls. "Please, somebody help me!" Only the whisper of the wind answered her. She had wandered away from town to explore the surrounding landscape, fascinated by the stark beauty of the desert and mountains beyond. No one knew where she had gone. No one would miss her until tomorrow, when she failed to appear at the schoolhouse for her first day of teaching. Miles away, Preston Zachary rode his stallion across the sun-baked earth, his eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had spent most of his 28 years in the saddle. Dust clung to his denim pants and cotton shirt, and his broad-brimmed hat shielded his tanned face from the relentless sun. A coil of rope hung from his saddle, a tool as essential to his trade as the Colt revolver strapped to his hip. Preston wasn't a man given to flights of fancy or notions of destiny. Life had taught him that survival depended on hard work, quick thinking, and occasionally, the ability to outdraw the other fellow. Yet something pulled at him today, drawing him away from his usual route back to his small cattle ranch outside Taylorsville. It was the barest flicker of movement that caught his attention, a flash of fabric caught on a cactus spine, too delicate to belong to any desert dweller. Dismounting, he examined the scrap of blue cotton, ladies' dress material, and fresh too. Concern furrowed his brow as he surveyed the surrounding terrain, noticing the faint impression of footprints heading toward an area he knew to be dotted with abandoned mining operations. "Hello?" he called out, his deep voice carrying across the emptiness. "Anybody out here?" Catherine's throat was raw from shouting. Hours had passed, and the circle of light above had dimmed as the sun began its descent. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it did in the desert at night, and she shivered in her torn dress. She had tried climbing the slick walls several times, only to slide back down, aggravating her injured ankle and adding scrapes to her palms and arms. Tears of frustration and fear streaked through the dust on her face. She had come west to build a new life, not to die alone in a hole in the ground. Gathering her remaining strength, she called out once more, her voice weaker now. "Help! Please!" Preston's head snapped up at the sound, faint but unmistakably human. He followed it cautiously, one hand hovering near his gun in case this was some trap laid by bandits. The land around Taylorsville wasn't as lawless as it had been a decade ago, but danger still lurked for the unwary. When he came upon the abandoned well, partially hidden by scrub brush, he almost missed it. But then he heard it again, a woman's voice, desperate and afraid. "Hello down there!" he called, kneeling at the edge and peering into the darkness. "Are you hurt?" Catherine's heart leaped at the sound of a human voice. "Yes! Oh, thank God! I've fallen and twisted my ankle. I can't climb out." Preston assessed the situation quickly. The well wasn't particularly deep, perhaps 15 feet, but its walls were smooth stone, impossible to scale without equipment. "Don't worry, madam. I've got a rope. I'll have you out of there in no time." As he returned to his horse for the rope, he wondered what kind of woman wandered alone in such dangerous territory. Foolish, perhaps, but brave to have survived this long. Uncoiling his lariat, he tested its strength before returning to the well. "I'm going to lower this rope down to you," he called. "Can you tie it around yourself, under your arms, nice and tight?" Catherine fumbled with the rope as it snaked down to her, her fingers numb from cold and fear. "I think so," she replied, her voice steadier now that rescue was at hand. She wrapped the rough hemp beneath her arms and secured it with the knot her father had taught her years ago during summers spent sailing on the Delaware River. "I've got it," she called up. All right, hold tight. This might be uncomfortable, Preston warned as he wrapped the rope's end around the saddle horn and began to guide his horse backward, using the animal's strength to lift Katherine from the depths. The rough rope bit into her skin through the thin fabric of her dress, but Katherine didn't care. She was being pulled toward the light, away from the cold darkness below. As she neared the top, strong hands reached down, grasping her arms and pulling her the final distance until she collapsed onto solid ground, trembling with relief and exhaustion. "Thank you," she gasped, looking up at her rescuer for the first time. Preston Zachary wasn't what she expected. His face was younger than his weathered clothing suggested, with intelligent blue eyes that assessed her condition with genuine concern. A day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and his brown hair curled from beneath his hat. "Preston Zachary, madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks just call me Press." "Katherine Ashton," she replied, attempting to stand before wincing as her weight shifted to her injured ankle. "Whoa there," Preston said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "You're not going anywhere on that ankle. Let me take a look." With surprising gentleness for hands so calloused, he examined her swollen ankle, his touch clinical yet respectful. "Doesn't appear broken, but you won't be walking back to town on it. Where are you staying?" "The boarding house on Main Street. I'm the new school teacher," Katherine explained, suddenly aware of her bedraggled appearance. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its careful arrangement, her dress was torn and filthy, and she must look a fright with dirt streaking her face. Preston nodded, seemingly unsurprised. "Heard we were getting a new teacher. Didn't expect to find her down a well on her first week in town." There was a hint of amusement in his voice, not unkind, but enough to bring a flush of embarrassment to Katherine's cheeks. "I wanted to see more of the landscape," she said defensively. "I didn't realize there were unmarked wells just waiting to swallow people up." "The West isn't like back east, Miss Ashton. Beautiful, but it'll kill you quick if you're not careful." He stood, dusting off his hands. "We should get you back before dark. Coyotes get active after sundown." Before she could protest, Preston had scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to his horse. "I'll have to put you in the saddle," he explained. "I'll walk alongside and lead us back to town." Katherine found herself seated atop the tall stallion, her skirts arranged as modestly as possible under the circumstances. Preston's consideration for her dignity touched her, especially after her foolish mistake had interrupted his day. As they made their slow way back toward town, the setting sun painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Katherine broke the comfortable silence. "Are you from around here, Mr. Zachary?" "Born in Missouri, but I've been in Utah territory since I was 16, he replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army, finally saved enough to buy my own spread a few years back. Small place, nothing fancy, but it's mine." There was pride in those last words, and Katherine could understand it. To own something outright, to build it with your own hands, wasn't that why people came west? "And you, Miss Ashton, what brings a lady from Philadelphia, judging by your accent all the way out to our humble town?" Katherine smiled, surprised he had placed her origins so accurately. "My father died last winter. Our finances weren't what I believed them to be. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher, it seemed like Providence." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. Many came west running from something: debt, the law, broken hearts. "Well, Taylorsville might not be Philadelphia, but it's growing. Got a proper church now, and the school, of course. Some decent folks mixed in with the usual frontier types." "And which are you, Mr. Zachary?" Katherine asked boldly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Depends who you ask, I suppose. I try to mind my business and help when needed." "Like pulling foolish school teachers from wells?" This time he did smile fully, transforming his serious face. "Exactly like that." By the time they reached the edge of town, stars were beginning to appear in the deepening blue of the sky. Preston led them directly to Dr. Simmons' house rather than the boarding house, insisting that Katherine's ankle needed proper attention. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, confirmed Preston's assessment a bad sprain, not a break. He wrapped it tightly and prescribed rest for at least 3 days, much to Katherine's dismay. "But tomorrow is my first day teaching," she protested. "The children can wait a few more days," Dr. Simmons said firmly. "Better than having their teacher collapse in front of them." After the doctor finished, Preston insisted on escorting Katherine to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson, the stern widow who ran the establishment, was beside herself when they arrived, her initial scolding turning to fussing once she understood what had happened. "You're lucky Mr. Zachary found you," she told Katherine as she helped her up the stairs to her room. "Good man, Preston, not like some of the ruffians in these parts." In the doorway, Preston awkwardly held his hat in his hands. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Ashton, if that's all right. Make sure you're recovering." Katherine nodded, suddenly shy. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Zachary. And thank you again. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." A shadow crossed his face. "Best not to think on it. Rest well." As the door closed behind him, Katherine sank onto her narrow bed, the events of the day washing over her. She had nearly died today, alone in a forgotten well, in a land she barely knew. Yet somehow, fate had sent Preston Zachary riding past at just the right moment. Perhaps coming west hadn't been such a mistake after all. True to his word, Preston appeared at the boarding house the next morning, hat in hand, as Mrs. Henderson showed him to the small parlor where Katherine sat, with her bandaged ankle propped on a footstool. She had managed to wash and change, and her hair was neatly pinned up again, but she still felt self-conscious as he entered. "You're looking better today," he said by way of greeting, remaining standing until she gestured to the chair opposite her. "Thanks to you," she replied, "though I'm afraid I've made a poor first impression on the town. Mrs. Henderson tells me everyone's already heard about the new schoolteacher's misadventure." Preston shrugged, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his clean shirt. He'd made an effort with his appearance, she noticed, his face freshly shaved and his hair combed. "Folks here love a good story. Give it a week and something else will catch their attention." They talked easily, Preston telling her more about Taylorsville and its inhabitants while Katherine shared stories of her life back east. She learned he had a small ranch about 5 miles outside of town, where he raised cattle and horses, living alone save for an old ranch hand named Hank, who had been with him since the beginning. "It's not much," he said with that same quiet pride she'd noticed before, "but each year it grows a little. One day it'll be something to pass on." "To your children?" Katherine asked before she could stop herself. A shadow crossed his face. "Haven't been that fortunate yet. Need to find the right woman willing to put up with a stubborn cowboy first." Then, as if embarrassed by the personal turn of the conversation, he stood. "I should let you rest. Town council's asking about when you might be able to start teaching. The children have been running wild since old Mr. Finch left last spring." "The doctor said 3 days," Katherine sighed, "though I don't see how I'll manage to walk to the schoolhouse even then." Preston considered this. "I could bring the wagon round, take you there in the mornings and bring you back after, at least until you're steady on your feet again." The offer surprised her. "That's very kind, but I couldn't impose. It's no imposition. I come into town most days anyway for supplies or to visit the saloon." At her raised eyebrow, he quickly added, "Just for a meal and some company. I'm not much for drinking or carousing." Katherine smiled at his hasty clarification. "Then I accept your kind offer, Mr. Zachary." "Press," he corrected her. "If I'm to be your driver, you might as well use my name." "Katherine," she offered in return. "Or Katie." He nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Katie," he repeated, as if testing how it felt to say it. "I'll see you in 3 days then, Katie." After he left, Katherine found herself staring at the door, a strange flutter in her chest. She told herself it was simply gratitude for his kindness, combined with the lingering shock of her ordeal. Nothing more. Yet, when he appeared 3 days later with his wagon, freshly painted and with a cushion placed on the hard wooden seat, she couldn't deny the leap of pleasure at seeing him again. The children of Taylorsville, ranging in age from 6 to 16, were initially more interested in the story of their new teacher's rescue than in the reading and arithmetic she had prepared. Katherine indulged them briefly, knowing that satisfying their curiosity would allow her to move on to actual teaching more quickly. "Did you cry when you were in the well?" asked 6-year-old Emma Miller, her blue eyes wide. "Were there snakes down there?" This from 10-year-old Thomas Wright, clearly hoping for a more dramatic story. Katherine handled their questions with grace and a touch of humor, then firmly steered them toward their lessons. By the end of the day, she had established both her authority and her approachability, a balance she knew would serve her well in the months to come. True to his word, Preston appeared with his wagon as the children were leaving, nodding politely to the parents who had come to collect the younger ones. Several men tipped their hats to him, and Katherine noticed that while the reception was respectful, there was a certain reserve in some of their greetings. "The first day is always the hardest," Preston commented as he helped her into the wagon, careful of her still tender ankle. "Though from the looks on those kids' faces as they left, you did just fine." "They're good children," Katherine said, settling her skirts around her. "Eager to learn, most of them. Even young Thomas, though he'd rather be playing at Cowboys and Indians than learning his multiplication tables." Preston chuckled as he guided the horses down the dusty main street. "Thomas has had it hard. His pa was killed in a mining accident last year. Mother's struggling to keep their small farm going." Katherine's heart ached at this information. "I didn't know. I'll be more patient with him." "That's one thing about small towns," Preston said, his eyes on the road. "Everyone knows everyone's business, for better or worse." "And what do they know about you?" Katherine asked boldly, curiosity overcoming propriety. Preston was quiet for a moment. "Depends who you ask," he finally said, echoing his words from their first meeting. "Some folks remember when I first came young, wild, ready to fight at the drop of a hat. Others see the man I am now. And which is the real Preston Zachary?" He glanced at her, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "Both, I suppose. We're all made up of who we were and who we're trying to be." The philosophical turn of the conversation surprised Katherine. This man was far more than the simple cowboy he appeared to be. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Preston would arrive each morning to take Katherine to the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing along fresh biscuits or dried apple slices that his ranch hand Hank had prepared. In the afternoons, he would appear again, timing his arrival just as school was letting out. Their conversations during these short journeys became the highlight of Katherine's day. Preston told her stories of the early days of the territory, of cattle drives, and the characters he'd met along the way. Katherine shared her dreams for the school and stories of her childhood in Philadelphia. Her ankle healed, but neither of them mentioned ending their arrangement. It seemed understood that Preston would continue to drive her to and from school, at least for now. The people of Taylorsville noticed, of course. Small towns thrived on such observations. Mrs. Henderson made pointed comments about Mr. Zachary's particular attention, while some of the mothers lingered after dropping off their children, clearly hoping to witness some interaction between the teacher and her driver. Katherine tried to ignore the whispers and knowing looks. She told herself that Preston was simply being kind, that his attention stemmed from the unusual circumstances of their meeting. Yet she couldn't deny the way her heart quickened when she saw his wagon approaching, or how she found herself taking extra care with her appearance each morning. For his part, Preston remained respectful, never overstepping the bounds of propriety. If his hand lingered a moment too long when helping her down from the wagon, or if his eyes sometimes held hers a beat longer than necessary, well, that could be attributed to the natural camaraderie that had developed between them. It was on a Friday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after her rescue, that everything changed. School had let out early for a town, gathering a barn raising for the Wilsons, whose previous structure had been destroyed in a lightning storm. Such events were not just acts of charity, but social occasions, with everyone in the community expected to contribute and participate. "Will you be attending the barn raising tomorrow?" Preston asked as they drove toward the boarding house. "I'd like to," Katherine replied. "Mrs. Henderson says the ladies are all bringing food, and there will be dancing afterward." She hesitated, then added, "Though I'm not sure what I could contribute. I'm afraid my cooking skills are rather limited." Preston smiled. "I doubt anyone would turn down a pretty face among all the hard work, cooking skills or not." At her blush, he quickly added, "Besides, these gatherings are about community. Everyone belongs, newcomers most of all." Katherine gathered her courage. "Will you be there?" "Wouldn't miss it. Hank and I are bringing some of our tools to help with the construction." They arrived at the boarding house, and Preston helped her down as usual. But this time, as her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately let go of her hand. "Miss Ashton, Katherine," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I was wondering if I might, that is, would you consider—" Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the appearance of Sheriff Mills, a gruff man in his 40s with a perpetually stern expression. "Zachary," he nodded curtly. "Miss Ashton." Preston dropped Katherine's hand, his expression closing. "Sheriff, need a word with you about those cattle that went missing from the Peterson place," the sheriff said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. Preston's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll be right with you." Turning back to Katherine, he touched the brim of his hat. "Until tomorrow, Miss Ashton." As she watched the two men walk away, tension evident in Preston's shoulders, Katherine couldn't help but wonder about the sheriff's cool demeanor. It seemed at odds with the kind, honorable man she had come to know. That evening, as she helped Mrs. Henderson prepare a pie to bring to the barn raising, Katherine carefully broached the subject. "Mrs. Henderson, may I ask you something about Mr. Zachary?" The older woman's hands paused briefly in their work of rolling out dough. "What would you like to know, dear?" "I notice some people in town seem reserved around him, even the sheriff. Yet he's been nothing but kind and honorable in my experience." Mrs. Henderson sighed, resuming her work. "Preston Zachary is a good man now, make no mistake. But when he first came to these parts, he ran with a rough crowd. There were rumors of cattle rustling, though nothing was ever proven against him personally." She lowered her voice. "And then there was the business with the Jenkins boy." Katherine's heart thumped uncomfortably. "What business?" "A shootout about 5 years back. Young Jenkins drew on Preston over some imagined slight at the saloon. Preston was faster." She shook her head. "It was ruled self-defense. Everyone saw Jenkins draw first, but the family had been here since the town was founded. Some folks have long memories." Katherine absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man who had rescued her from the well, who brought her biscuits and spoke so gently with the school children who sometimes ran up to greet him. "People can change," she said quietly. "Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "They surely can, dear. And Preston Zachary has changed more than most. Hasn't touched a drop of whiskey in years, works that ranch of his from dawn till dusk, and never misses church on Sundays. But past sins cast long shadows in small towns." That night, Katherine lay awake thinking about Preston, not just the man who had pulled her from darkness, but the younger, wilder version Mrs. Henderson had described. She found she wasn't afraid or repulsed by this knowledge. If anything, it made his current kindness and steadiness all the more remarkable. The barn raising began early the next morning, with men arriving at the Wilson property just after dawn to begin the framework. Women came later, setting up tables for the midday meal and organizing the food contributions. Children ran about underfoot, alternately helping and hindering the proceedings. Katherine arrived with Mrs. Henderson, carrying the pie they had baked together. Her eyes immediately sought out Preston among the men working on the rising skeleton of the barn. She found him easily, his tall figure distinctive, as he worked alongside others to lift a heavy beam into place. The muscles in his arms strained against his shirt, and sweat darkened the fabric across his back. As if sensing her gaze, he turned, wiping his brow with a handkerchief. Their eyes met across the busy yard, and a smile spread slowly across his face. With a quick word to the man beside him, Preston made his way toward her. "Miss Ashton," he greeted her, touching his hat, despite the informality of the occasion. "You look lovely today." Katherine smoothed the skirt of her blue gingham dress self-consciously. It was one of her plainer outfits, chosen for practicality, but his compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look—" She gestured vaguely at his dirt-streaked appearance. "Busy." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "It's honest work. The frame's nearly done. We'll be ready for the siding after lunch, then the roofing." "It's amazing how quickly it goes up with so many hands," Katherine marveled, watching the coordinated effort of the townsmen. "That's the way of things out here," Preston nodded. "No one survives alone, not for long anyway." The moment stretched between them, weighted with something Katherine couldn't quite name. Then Mrs. Wilson called out that lunch was ready, breaking the spell. Throughout the afternoon, Katherine found herself watching Preston as he worked. There was something compelling about his focused dedication, the respect the other men showed him, despite whatever reservations some might still harbor. She noticed how gentle he was with the children who occasionally brought water to the workers, how he took time to explain what he was doing to the older boys who hovered nearby, eager to learn. By sunset, the barn stood complete, a testament to the community's strength and cooperation. Lanterns were lit, tables cleared and pushed aside to make room for dancing. Someone produced a fiddle, another a harmonica, and music filled the twilight air. Katherine stood to the side, watching as couples formed and began to dance. Married folks mostly, comfortable in their partnerships, though some of the younger unmarried people joined in as well. May I have this dance? Preston's voice came from beside her, startling her from her observations. He had cleaned up, his face and hands washed, hair combed back, though his clothes still bore the evidence of the day's hard work. I would be delighted, Katherine replied, placing her hand in his extended one. His hand was warm and calloused against hers as he led her to the makeshift dance floor. When he placed his other hand respectfully at her waist, Katherine felt a jolt of awareness race through her body. They began to move in time with the lively tune, Preston guiding her with surprising grace for such a tall man. You dance well, she commented, looking up at him. My mother's influence, he replied with a small smile. She insisted I learn, said no son of hers would stumble around like a newborn calf at social gatherings. The mental image made Katherine laugh. I can't imagine you ever being clumsy. Oh, I had my moments, grew too tall too fast as a boy, took years to get comfortable in my own skin. The music shifted to a slower tune, and Preston's hand on her waist drew her slightly closer, still entirely proper, but intimate enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the clean scent of soap and honest sweat. Katherine, he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, there's something I've been wanting to ask you. Her heart beat faster. Yes? Would you consider allowing me to call on you? Properly, I mean. Sunday afternoons, perhaps. The traditional request for courtship was both expected and surprising. Katherine had sensed his interest, had acknowledged her own growing feelings, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I would like that very much, she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. His face brightened, years seeming to fall away with his smile. I'll speak with Mrs. Henderson, make sure she approves. She will, Katherine assured him, knowing the boarding house owner had been watching their growing attachment with approval. As they continued to dance, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement, a promise of something more. Katherine was acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected, of the strength in his hands, the intensity in his blue eyes when they met hers. The evening continued, and they danced several more times, though propriety demanded they also partner with others. Katherine found herself counting the minutes until she could be in his arms again, even as she made polite conversation with Mrs. Wilson about the school, and accepted a dance from the town's banker, a widower in his 50s. When the festivities finally wound down and it was time to leave, Preston offered to drive her back to the boarding house. I'd like that, Katherine said, gathering her shawl against the evening chill. The drive back to town was quiet, both of them content with the comfortable silence and the knowledge that something significant had changed between them. When they arrived at the boarding house, Preston helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist. I had a wonderful time today, Katherine said softly. As did I. He hesitated, then added, I'll call on you tomorrow afternoon, if that's agreeable. Very agreeable, she replied, a smile curving her lips. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and part of her hoped he would. Instead, he took her hand and pressed his lips gently to her knuckles, a gesture so formal and yet so intimate that it made her breath catch. Until tomorrow, Katie, he murmured against her skin before releasing her hand. Until tomorrow, Prez, she echoed, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. As promised, Preston appeared at the boarding house the next afternoon, dressed in his Sunday best clean dark trousers, a white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He had brought her wildflowers, gathered from the prairie, their simple beauty more touching than any hothouse bouquet. Mrs. Henderson, playing her role as a chaperone with obvious pleasure, served them tea in the parlor, and then retreated to a corner with her mending, providing the illusion of privacy while maintaining propriety. They talked easily, as they had during their wagon rides, but there was a new dimension to their conversation. Now tentative explorations of hopes and dreams, careful revelations of fears and disappointments. I always wanted to travel, Katherine confessed. To see the great cities of Europe, the ancient ruins my father read about in his books. Maybe you will someday, Preston said. The West is changing, railroads connecting everywhere, making the world smaller. Would you like to travel? She asked, curious about his dreams. He considered this. I'd like to see the ocean someday. Stand at the edge of something so vast it makes a man realize his true size. His eyes met hers. But mostly, I want to build something lasting. a place that will stand long after I'm gone. The sincerity in his voice moved her deeply. Here was a man who understood legacy, who thought beyond his own immediate desires. Their Sunday afternoon visits became a ritual over the next few weeks. Sometimes they would walk through town, if the weather was fine, Preston proudly escorting her down the main street for all to see. Other times they would remain in the boarding house parlor, sharing stories and slowly discovering each other's hearts. Katherine learned about the hardships of his youth, his father's death when Preston was just 12, the struggle to help his mother and younger sister survive, his wild years when grief and anger had driven him to poor choices. Preston heard about her sheltered upbringing in Philadelphia, her father's love of books that had inspired her own education, and the shocking discovery after his death that he had gambled away most of their fortune, leaving Katherine and her mother nearly destitute. "Is that why you came west?" he asked during one of their walks, his arm properly offering support as they strolled past the small shops that lined Taylorsville's main street. "Partly," Katherine admitted. "The teaching position offered independence, a way to support myself honorably. And I think I needed to prove I could stand on my own, make my own way." "You've certainly done that," Preston said with admiration. "The whole town sings your praises. Even old Mr. Fletcher, who initially thought no woman could properly educate boys beyond basic reading, now admits you've done wonders with his grandson's arithmetic." Katherine smiled, pleased by the recognition of her work. "And what about you, Preston Zachary? What do you think of my teaching abilities?" His eyes, warm and intent, held hers. "I think you could accomplish anything you set your mind to, Katherine Ashton." The October afternoon was growing chilly, and Katherine pulled her shawl closer around her shoulders. Preston noticed immediately. "You're cold. We should head back." "Not yet," she protested. "It's too beautiful to go inside just yet." The autumn colors painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and russet, the cottonwoods along the creek blazing yellow against the blue sky. Preston considered her for a moment, then removed his jacket and placed it around her shoulders. "Better?" he asked, his hands lingering on her arms. The jacket carried his warmth and scent, enveloping her in a cocoon that felt intimately personal. "Much better," she murmured. "Thank you." They continued their walk, crossing the small bridge over the creek that ran along the edge of town. Neither spoke, but the silence between them hummed with unspoken feelings. Finally, Preston stopped, turning to face her. "Katherine, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone alarmed her. "What is it?" He looked away briefly, gathering his thoughts, then met her eyes again. "You know parts of my past, but not all. When I first came to Taylorsville, I wasn't a good man. I drank too much, fought too easily, ran with men who didn't respect the law or other people's property." Katherine nodded slowly. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned there were rumors about cattle rustling." Preston's jaw tightened. "More than rumors. I never stole cattle myself, but I knew the men who did. Rode with them, helped them sell the animals in other territories." He paused. "And then there was the shooting." "The Jenkins boy," Katherine said softly. "I heard about that too." Surprise flickered in his eyes, followed by resignation. "Of course you did. Small town?" He sighed. "It was self-defense, like folks said. But I never should have been in that situation in the first place. Never should have let it escalate." Katherine reached out, touching his arm lightly. "What happened afterward?" "I nearly drank myself to death over it," Preston admitted, his voice rough with remembered pain. "Then one night, Pastor Williams found me passed out behind the saloon. Instead of leaving me there like most would have, he got me to my feet and talked to me for hours, made me see what I was becoming." He looked up at the mountains, his profile strong against the afternoon light. "I stopped drinking that night, started attending church, worked honest jobs until I saved enough for a small piece of land, built my cabin with my own hands. Each year I added more cattle, more land, when I could afford it." Turning back to her, his eyes held both vulnerability and determination. "I wanted you to know all of it, before this goes any further. Some folks in town still see me as that angry young man. They may never forget, never fully trust. I wouldn't blame you if knowing all this changes how you feel." Katherine considered his words carefully, understanding the courage it had taken to reveal his darkest moments. "The man who pulled me from that well," she finally said. The man who brings fresh biscuits to share with my students sometimes, who dances with old Mrs. Peterson even though she steps on his toes, that's the real Preston Zachary. The rest is just the path that brought you here." Something shifted in his expression, hope replacing uncertainty. "You're sure about that?" "I've never been more certain of anything," Katherine replied firmly. Preston stepped closer, one hand coming up to cup her cheek gently. "Katherine Ashton, I believe I'm falling in love with you." The confession, so plainly stated, stole her breath. "Preston, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know, wanted to be honest about everything, my past and my feelings." But Katherine didn't want to wait, didn't need to consider her response. She had known her heart for weeks now, perhaps since the moment he had pulled her from darkness into light. "I love you too," she said simply. For a moment, Preston stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this perfect moment. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he lowered his head. Their first kiss was gentle, a question asked and answered in the meeting of lips. Katherine's eyes fluttered closed as warmth spread through her body. His hand remained at her cheek, thumb brushing softly against her skin, while his other arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected to find you," he murmured. "Never thought I deserved something this good." "Perhaps that's why you found me in that well," Katherine suggested, a smile in her voice. "The universe's way of bringing us together." Preston chuckled. "If that's the case, I'll be grateful for that, well, for the rest of my days." As they walked back toward town, fingers intertwined, Katherine felt a certainty she had never known before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in this untamed land, they would face them together. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Katherine's life. She threw herself into her teaching with renewed energy, while her evenings and Sundays were filled with Preston's company. They established traditions, Sunday dinners at the boarding house with Mrs. Henderson beaming her approval, occasional picnics by the creek when the weather permitted, letters exchanged on days when Preston's ranch work kept him too busy to come to town. November brought colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Taylorsville. The town began preparations for Thanksgiving, a celebration that took on special significance in communities where survival itself was an achievement worth marking. One crisp Sunday afternoon, Preston arrived at the boarding house with an unusual request. "I'd like to show you my ranch," he said as they sat in the parlor. "If Mrs. Henderson approves, of course." The boarding house proprietor, sitting nearby with her ever-present mending, looked up with a knowing smile. "As long as you have her back before dark, Mr. Zachary, I see no harm in it." The 15-minute wagon ride took them beyond the boundaries of town, following a well-maintained dirt road that wound through rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of cottonwood trees. As they crested a small rise, Preston's ranch came into view, a sturdy log cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed, their breath visible in the cold air. "It's not much compared to the big spreads," Preston said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice as he watched for her reaction. "But it's paid for, every acre." Katherine took in the neat, well-maintained buildings, the healthy livestock, the garden plot beside the cabin now dormant for winter, but clearly well-tended during the growing season. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "You've built something wonderful here." The pride in his smile warmed her more than her heavy coat. "Come, let me show you around." He helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands at her waist now a familiar comfort. As they walked toward the cabin, the door opened and an older man emerged, leaning slightly on a cane. "You must be the school teacher we've been hearing so much about," he called, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "Hank," Preston said. "This is Miss Katherine Ashton. Katherine, this is Hank Miller, the finest ranch hand in Utah Territory and the worst cook west of the Mississippi." Hank snorted at this introduction. "Don't listen to him, miss. My biscuits are famous." "Infamous, more like," Preston retorted good-naturedly. Katherine laughed at their banter, immediately liking the older man. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Miller. I've heard a great deal about you." "All lies, I'm sure," Hank replied with a wink. "Well, don't let me keep you from your tour. I was just heading out to check on that heifer that's due to calve." As Hank limped toward the barn, Katherine noticed the affection with which Preston watched him go. "He seems wonderful," she commented. "He is," Preston agreed. "Took a chance on me when most wouldn't. Taught me everything I know about ranching." He offered her his arm. "Shall we?" The cabin's interior surprised Katherine with its comfort and attention to detail. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, dominated by a large stone fireplace currently radiating welcome heat. The furniture was simple, but well-crafted: a solid table with 4 chairs, a comfortable-looking armchair by the fire, shelves holding books that made Katherine's heart leap with pleasure. "You read," she said, moving toward the small collection. "When there's time," Preston replied. "Mostly in winter, when the days are shorter and the work less demanding." Katherine ran her fingers along the spine's history, some philosophy, a few novels. "These were my father's," Preston explained. "He valued education, though he never had much himself." There were 2 doors leading off the main room. "Bedrooms," Preston said. "Mine and Hank's. There's a root cellar below, and the necessary out back." It was a bachelor's home, practical and sturdy. Yet Katherine could easily envision it transformed into something more: curtains at the windows, a quilt on the back of the sofa, children's laughter filling the spaces between these solid walls. The thought startled her with its clarity and longing. Preston was watching her, something uncertain in his expression. "It's not much compared to what you're used to back east." Katherine shook her head, stopping his self-deprecation. "It's a home, Preston, a real home, built with your own hands." She moved to the window, looking out at the land stretching toward the mountains. "There's room to breathe here, room to grow." He came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "That's what I've always thought. Room to grow." After showing her the cabin, Preston took her to see the barn, the corrals, the spring-fed pond that provided water even in the driest summers. Everywhere she looked, Katherine saw evidence of careful planning and hard work, the mark of a man building something to last. As they walked back toward the wagon for the return journey, the sun was already lowering toward the western mountains, painting the landscape in gold. Preston stopped, turning to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Katherine," he began, his voice deep with emotion, "seeing you here, in the place I've built, it feels right in a way I can't quite explain." She squeezed his hands encouragingly. "It feels right to me, too." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I know it's soon. We've known each other less than 3 months, but when you know something is right, waiting seems pointless." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the fading light. "Katherine Ashton, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" The ring he held was simple, a gold band with a small pearl set in its center. But to Katherine, it was more beautiful than any diamond. "Yes," she said without hesitation, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston Zachary." Joy transformed his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman worthy of it." His eyes, intense and filled with emotion, held hers. "She would have loved you." Katherine's heart felt too full for words. Instead, she reached up, drawing his face down to hers for a kiss that expressed everything she couldn't say: her love, her commitment, her certainty that this was right. When they returned to town, Mrs. Henderson took one look at Katherine's radiant face and the pearl ring on her finger and burst into tears of joy. "I knew it," she exclaimed, embracing first Katherine, then a startled Preston. "I just knew you two were meant for each other, from the moment he brought you back from that well." News of their engagement spread through Taylorsville with typical small-town efficiency. By the following morning, Katherine's students were asking if they could call her Mrs. Zachary instead of Miss Ashton, while parents stopped her on the street to offer congratulations. Most were genuinely happy for them, though Katherine noticed a few reserved reactions, particularly from the Jenkins family when they passed in the street. But overall, the town seemed to view their match as both suitable and romantically fitting, the cowboy and the school teacher he had rescued from the well. They decided on a Christmas wedding just 6 weeks away. It was sooner than might be considered proper back east, but frontier pragmatism outweighed social conventions. Winter would make travel difficult, and spring would bring the demands of calving season and planting. Katherine wrote to her mother in Philadelphia, explaining her whirlwind romance and impending marriage. "I know it seems sudden," she wrote, "but when you meet Preston, you'll understand. He is everything father would have approved of honorable, hard-working kind. The circumstances of our meeting were unusual, but perhaps that's fitting for the unexpected blessing he has brought to my life." She invited her mother to come for the wedding, though she knew the journey would be difficult in winter, and her mother's health had never been robust. The reply came 2 weeks later, regrets that the trip would be impossible at this time, but warm wishes and a promise to visit in the spring when travel was easier. Though disappointed, Katherine understood. She had Mrs. Henderson to help with wedding preparations, and the women of Taylorsville rallied around her with advice and offers of assistance. Even Mrs. Jenkins, after initial reserve, contributed a hand-embroidered tablecloth as a wedding gift, a gesture of reconciliation that moved both Katherine and Preston deeply. December arrived with a heavy snowfall that transformed Taylorsville into a wonderland of white. The school children were wild with excitement over both the snow and their teacher's approaching wedding, making concentration on lessons nearly impossible. Katherine indulged them somewhat, incorporating wedding customs from different cultures into their history lessons, and using the planning of the celebration as material for arithmetic problems. Preston came to town less frequently as winter weather made travel more challenging, but when he did visit, their reunions were all the sweeter for the separation. He brought news of progress on the cabin, an extension he was building to give them more space, new furniture he had commissioned from the town's carpenter. "Hank insists on moving to the bunkhouse after we're married," he told her one snowy afternoon as they sat by the fire in the boarding house parlor. "Says he doesn't want to intrude on newlyweds." Katherine blushed at the implication, though she appreciated the old ranch hand's thoughtfulness. "He's welcome to stay in the cabin," she insisted. "It's his home, too." Preston's eyes softened at her generosity. "I told him the same, but he's determined, says it's time for the next chapter." He took her hand, thumb brushing over the pearl ring. "He likes you, by the way, says you've got spirit." "High praise indeed," Katherine smiled, recalling the gruff but kind old man. The week before the wedding brought clear skies and milder temperatures, a blessing that allowed final preparations to proceed smoothly. The ceremony would take place in the town's small church, followed by a celebration in the community hall. Every household in Taylorsville was contributing something: food, decorations, music, making it as much a community event as a personal one. Katherine's wedding dress was a collaborative effort, fashioned from cream-colored fabric ordered from Salt Lake City, with lace contributed by Mrs. Henderson from her own wedding dress. Several women in town had helped with the sewing, turning the simple design into something truly beautiful. The night before the wedding, Katherine stood in her room at the boarding house, looking at the dress hanging by the window. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Preston Zachary, would leave this room for a new life at the ranch that already felt like home whenever she visited. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Henderson entered, carrying a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "A final gift," the older woman said, placing it in Katherine's hands. "Something every bride should have." Curious, Katherine unwrapped the package to find a delicate nightgown of fine white cotton, embroidered with tiny flowers around the neckline. "Mrs. Henderson, it's beautiful," she breathed, touched by the thoughtful gift. "Every bride deserves something pretty for her wedding night," Mrs. Henderson said, with a knowing smile. "Now, you should rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." After the older woman left, Katherine sat on the edge of her bed, running her fingers over the soft fabric of the nightgown. Tomorrow night she would wear this in the cabin, her new home with Preston as her husband. The thought brought both nervous anticipation and absolute certainty. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the sun reflecting brilliantly off the snow-covered landscape. Katherine awoke early, too excited to sleep any longer, and spent the quiet morning hours writing in her journal, recording her thoughts on this momentous day. Mrs. Henderson arrived mid-morning, with several other women to help her prepare. They brought hot water for bathing, styled her hair in an elegant arrangement topped with a crown of dried white flowers, and finally helped her into the wedding dress that fit as if made for royalty rather than a frontier schoolteacher. When she looked in the mirror, Katherine barely recognized herself. The young woman who stared back seemed transformed, radiant with happiness, eyes bright with anticipation. How far she had come from that frightened girl at the bottom of the well, calling desperately for help. The church bells began to ring at precisely 2 o'clock, calling the town to witness the union of their school teacher and the rancher who had rescued her. Preston had arranged for a sleigh to carry Katherine to the church, the horses adorned with bells that jingled merrily as they moved through the snowy streets. Inside the small church, every pew was filled. Preston waited at the altar beside Pastor Williams, looking impossibly handsome in a new black suit, his face solemn, until he caught sight of Katherine entering on the arm of Dr. Simmons, who had agreed to give her away in her father's absence. The love that blazed in Preston's eyes as she walked toward him melted away any lingering nervousness. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his deep voice filling the small space, "we are gathered here today to witness the joining of this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but profound, traditional vows spoken with sincere emotion, rings exchanged with hands that trembled slightly, a kiss that sealed their union while the assembled townspeople broke into spontaneous applause. "May I present Mr. and Mrs. Preston Zachary," the pastor announced, and another cheer went up, even louder than before. Katherine found herself laughing and crying at once as they made their way back down the aisle, now husband and wife. Preston's arm was steady around her waist, his smile so bright it rivaled the winter sun streaming through the church windows. The celebration that followed in the community hall was everything a frontier wedding should be: abundant food, lively music, dancing that continued well into the evening. Katherine danced with her new husband, with Dr. Simmons, with young Thomas Wright, who had become one of her favorite students, and even with old Mr. Fletcher, who declared gruffly that she was a credit to the teaching profession, marriage notwithstanding. As the evening progressed, Preston found her during a moment of respite, taking her hand and drawing her slightly away from the festivities. "Happy, Mrs. Zachary?" he asked, his voice low and intimate despite the noise around them. "Completely," she assured him, still thrilling to hear her new name. "And you, Mr. Zachary?" "More than I ever thought possible." He glanced toward the door, where fresh snowflakes were beginning to drift past. "It's starting to snow again. We should probably head home before it gets worse." Home. Such a simple word, yet so profound in its implications. Their departure was marked by good-natured teasing and a shower of rice as they made their way to the waiting sleigh, now packed with wedding gifts and Katherine's trunk of belongings. Wrapped in thick blankets against the cold, they set off toward their ranch, the sleigh runners gliding smoothly over the fresh snow. The journey passed in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts as the town receded behind them. The landscape was transformed by moonlight and snow into something magical, vast, pristine, beautiful in its wildness. Just like their love, Katherine thought. Born in unlikely circumstances, defying convention, yet undeniably real and strong. When they crested the rise that revealed the ranch below, Katherine gasped in surprise. The cabin windows glowed with warm light, and lanterns had been hung from the porch, creating a welcoming beacon in the darkness. "Hank," Preston explained with a smile, "said he wanted to make sure we had a proper welcome." The old ranch hand was nowhere to be seen when they arrived, having tactfully made himself scarce, but he had left his mark. A fire blazed in the hearth, warming the cabin, and on the table sat a bottle of wine with 2 glasses and a note that simply read, "Congratulations." Preston carried Katherine across the threshold, a tradition she had insisted upon despite his teasing about her being too modern for such customs. Inside, she saw the changes he had made in preparation for her arrival: curtains at the windows, a comfortable sofa near the fire, bookshelves now filled with both his books and the ones she had brought from Philadelphia. Setting her down gently, Preston watched as she moved through the space, touching things, absorbing the reality that this was now her home. "Do you like it?" he asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Katherine turned to him, her heart so full she could barely speak. "It's perfect," she managed finally. "Absolutely perfect." The space between them vanished as Preston drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more urgent than any they had shared before. No longer constrained by propriety or the need for restraint, they gave themselves fully to the passion that had been building between them for months. Later, as they lay together in the bed they would now share, Katherine rested her head on Preston's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in pristine white, but inside, wrapped in each other's arms, they had all the warmth they needed. "I was thinking," Preston said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, "about what you said that day by the well about the universe bringing us together." Katherine smiled against his skin. "What about it?" "I think you were right. Some things are just meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem." He tilted her face up to his, eyes serious in the dim light. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret falling down that well, Katherine Zachary." She laughed softly, touching his beloved face. "I already consider it the luckiest accident of my life, but I'll hold you to that promise, Cowboy." His answering smile was everything she had ever wanted, tender, passionate, promising a future filled with love and adventure in this wild, beautiful land they now shared. Winter passed in a honeymoon haze of discovery and adjustment. Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life, how to cook on the wood stove, the importance of conserving water hauled from the well, the satisfaction of seeing their cattle survive the harsh winter months through careful planning and hard work. Preston, in turn, adapted to sharing his space and his life with a woman whose mind was as quick as her smile. They read together by the fire in the evenings, discussed books and ideas, sometimes argued passionately about politics or philosophy, only to make up just as passionately later in their bed. Hank became like family to Katherine, his gruff exterior hiding a gentle heart. He taught her to ride better than the basic skills she had arrived with, showed her how to identify edible plants that would emerge in spring, and regaled her with stories of Preston's early days on the ranch, much to her husband's mock dismay. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the miracle of new life as the calves were born and the land turned green again, Katherine had news of her own to share. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of pink and gold. Preston's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him in the easy intimacy they had developed. "I have something to tell you," Katherine said, her voice both nervous and excited. Preston looked down at her, curiosity in his eyes. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "In late September, Dr. Simmons thinks." For a moment, Preston seemed frozen in place. Then a slow smile spread across his face, growing until it transformed his entire countenance. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. When he drew back, his own eyes were suspiciously bright. "Are you happy about this?" he asked earnestly. "Very happy," Katherine assured him. "A little scared, too. Having a baby out here, so far from everything I know." "You won't be alone," Preston promised. "I'll be right beside you, every step of the way, and every woman in Taylorsville will be offering advice and help, whether we want it or not." His smile turned wry at this last observation. He was right, of course. When news of Katherine's pregnancy spread through town, the women rallied around her with practical gifts, advice both solicited and unsolicited, and offers of assistance for when the baby arrived. Katherine continued teaching through the spring term, not wanting to leave her students without instruction before the summer break. By the time school ended in early June, her condition was becoming visible, prompting curious questions from her pupils that she answered with as much honesty as propriety allowed. The summer months were busy ones on the ranch. Preston and Hank worked from dawn until dusk, maintaining fences, moving cattle to fresh pasture, and preparing for the fall roundup. Katherine kept the household running, planted a vegetable garden that flourished under her care, and began transforming one corner of their bedroom into a nursery space for the coming child. In July, Katherine's mother finally made the journey from Philadelphia, arriving on the stagecoach looking exhausted but determined. Eleanor Ashton was a slender, elegant woman whose refined manners initially seemed at odds with the rough-hewn frontier town. But she adapted with surprising resilience, quickly winning over Mrs. Henderson and the other town matrons with her gracious ways and genuine interest in their lives. Her first meeting with Preston had been a moment of tension for Katherine, who desperately wanted the two people she loved most to approve of each other. She needn't have worried. Eleanor took one look at the tall rancher, who greeted her with nervous formality, noted the protective way he held her daughter's arm, and promptly declared him exactly the sort of man I hoped Katherine would find. Later, she confided to Katherine, "He looks at you the way your father used to look at me, like you're the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one. That's worth more than any fortune or social position. Eleanor stayed for a month, helping Katherine prepare for the baby, sewing tiny garments with exquisite stitches, and gradually coming to love the wild beauty of the land that had claimed her daughter. By the time she departed, promising to return when the baby was born, if Katherine wanted, she had left her mark on their home and hearts. As Katherine's pregnancy progressed, Preston became increasingly protective, insisting on driving her to town for any errands, enlisting the help of a local girl to assist with the heavier household chores, and checking on her multiple times throughout the day when he was working nearby. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Katherine protested one evening, as he insisted on bringing her tea rather than letting her get it herself. "Humor me," Preston replied, kissing her forehead. "I've never been a father before. I'm not entirely sure how this is supposed to work." His confession, so honest and vulnerable, melted her irritation. "I've never been a mother before," she reminded him softly. "We'll learn together." September arrived with golden days and cool nights, the land beginning its transition toward autumn. Katherine's time grew near, and with it came increasing discomfort and anticipation. Dr. Simmons had arranged to stay in town, rather than making his usual circuit of outlying settlements, ready to attend when she went into labor. The pains began in the early morning hours of September 25th, waking Katherine from a restless sleep. For a moment, she lay still, waiting to see if they would continue. When another contraction gripped her a few minutes later, she gently shook Preston awake. "It's time," she told him, watching as understanding dawned in his sleepy eyes, quickly followed by alarm. The next hours passed in a blur of pain, determination, and ultimately, wonder. Preston sent Hank for the doctor, then remained steadfastly by Katherine's side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement when she felt she couldn't continue. Dr. Simmons arrived mid-morning, calmly taking charge of the situation. Mrs. Henderson came too, bringing her experience from assisting at countless births in the community. Just as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin and their hearts. Dr. Simmons placed the swaddled infant in Katherine's arms, his normally stern face softened with a smile. "A fine, healthy boy," he pronounced. "Congratulations to you both." Katherine looked down at the tiny face, perfect in every detail from the button nose to the shock of dark hair that promised to be as unruly as his father's. When she glanced up at Preston, she found him staring at their child with an expression of such awe and love that it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked softly. With hands that trembled slightly, Preston took the baby, cradling him with infinite care. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your pa." They named him William James Zachary William, after Preston's father, James after Katherine's. From his first days, it was clear he had inherited his mother's curious nature and his father's determined spirit, a combination that would serve him well in the frontier world that was his birthright. Life settled into a new rhythm around the baby's needs. Katherine discovered the exhaustion and joy of motherhood, the way time seemed both to stretch endlessly during sleepless nights and to fly by as William grew and changed with astonishing speed. Preston proved to be a devoted father, unashamed to show his tenderness with his son. In the evenings, he would hold William while Katherine rested, telling the infant stories about the land that would one day be his, singing old cowboy songs in a surprisingly melodic baritone. By the time winter returned, blanketing their ranch in snow once more, William was smiling and reaching for familiar faces. Their first Christmas as a family was a quiet celebration at home, though Preston surprised Katherine with a rocking chair he had commissioned from the town carpenter, carved with wildflowers like those he had brought her during their courtship. As they sat by the fire that Christmas night, William sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Katherine reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. Just over a year had passed since she had fallen into that abandoned well, certain she would die alone in the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About the well," she replied honestly. "About how sometimes what seems like tragedy can turn out to be the greatest blessing." Preston nodded, understanding immediately. "I still ride past it sometimes," he admitted. "Always tip my hat in thanks." Katherine laughed softly. "Do you think our children and grandchildren will believe the story when we tell them that their parents' love story began with a rescue from a well?" The best stories are the ones that seem too unlikely to be true, Preston replied, drawing her closer against his side. And ours is just beginning, Mrs. Zachary. As the fire crackled and their son slept peacefully, Katherine knew he was right. Their story had begun with a cry for help and a cowboy's rope, but it would continue through all the joys and challenges that lay ahead, a love as vast and enduring as the western landscape that had brought them together. In the years that followed, the Zachary Ranch prospered under Preston's careful management. The original herd grew, as did their land holdings as they purchased adjacent properties when they became available. The small cabin expanded too, with additional rooms added as their family increased first, with the birth of their daughter Emily, 2 years after William, then with twins Robert and Rebecca 3 years after that. Katherine found ways to balance motherhood with her passion for education, initially teaching her own children at home, then opening the ranch to neighboring families whose farms were too distant from town for their children to attend the regular school. What began as informal lessons around her kitchen table eventually grew into a small schoolhouse built on their property, where Katherine taught twice weekly, passing on her love of learning to the next generation of frontier children. Preston continued to rise in the esteem of the community as the wild young man of his past receded further into memory. He served on the town council, helped organize the region's first agricultural cooperative, and became known for his fair dealing and steady judgment. Even the Jenkins family, after years of reserve, finally extended a hand of true reconciliation when Preston risked his life to rescue young Thomas Jenkins' brother of the man he had killed from a flash flood that swept through the canyon during a violent summer storm. Their love, born in that unlikely rescue from the well, deepened with each passing year, weathering the inevitable challenges of frontier life, drought seasons that threatened the cattle, illnesses that frightened them when they struck their children, conflicts that arose between neighbors over water rights and grazing boundaries. Through it all, they remained each other's strength and solace, the partnership formed in those early days growing stronger through shared purpose and enduring affection. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children now ranging from teenagers to young adults, Preston surprised Katherine by taking her back to the site of the abandoned well, where they had first met. The landscape had changed over the years the town had grown. New ranches and farms dotted the once empty prairie, but the well remained, now safely covered and marked with a small stone monument. "I had this made," Preston explained as Katherine read the simple inscription, "Where Katherine Ashton Zachary fell and found her future, 1879. Tears filled her eyes as she traced the carved letters. "You sentimental fool," she said fondly. Preston's hair was now streaked with silver, lines of experience etched around his eyes and mouth, but his smile was the same one that had captured her heart all those years ago. "Only for you," he replied, wrapping his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. As they stood there, the setting sun painting the landscape in the same golden hues as on that fateful day, Katherine reflected on how a moment of terror had led to a lifetime of joy. The well that might have been her grave had instead become the foundation of everything she treasured: her marriage, her children, the life they had built together on this wild, beautiful land. "No regrets?" Preston asked quietly, knowing her thoughts as he so often did. Katherine turned to him, the love of 20 years shining in her eyes. "Not one," she assured him, standing on tiptoe to kiss the man who had pulled her from darkness into light, the cowboy who had become her husband, her partner, her home. As they walked hand in hand back to their waiting horses, the first stars appearing in the evening sky, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that some love stories were simply meant to be even ones that began with a cry for help, a lowered rope, and a rescue that saved not just a life, but a heart.